Okay. All right. We will go ahead and get started with today's panel on I Am Not Your Asian Stereotype. Before we jump into the session, we would like to share a land acknowledgement with you all. So Paradise Valley Community College is located on the traditional lands of the Akimo O'odham, Pima, and Hohokam peoples. There are 22 federally recognized tribes in Arizona and 574 across the United States. We acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory, and we honor and respect the many diverse Indigenous peoples still connected to this land on which we gather. Without them, we would not have access to our education or the land we live, work, learn, and commune on. We take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land. We offer our respect to their elders and to all Indigenous people of the past, present, and future. So thank you all for that, and thank you, Mike, for helping us get that more fleshed out land acknowledgement. So today we are pleased to have 4 of our PVCC colleagues join us to have a panel talking about Asian stereotypes. The first thing we're going to do today is actually watch a short TED Talk to set the stage for the conversation.
My name is Canwin, and I play both the piano and the violin. I aspire to someday be a doctor, and my favorite subject is calculus. My mom and dad are tiger parents who won't let me go to sleepovers, but they make up for it by serving my favorite meal every single day: rice. And I'm a really bad driver. So my question for you now is, how long did it take you to figure out I was joking? As you've probably guessed, today I'm going to talk about race, and I'll start off by sharing with you my story of growing up Asian American. I moved to the United States when I was 2 years old, so almost my entire life has been a blend of 2 cultures. I eat pasta with chopsticks, am addicted to orange chicken, and my childhood hero was Yao Ming. But having grown up in North Dakota, South Dakota, and Idaho, all states with incredibly little racial diversity, it was difficult to reconcile my so-called exotic Chinese heritage with my mainstream American self. Used to being the only Asian in the room, I was self-conscious that the first thing people noticed about me was that I wasn't white. And as a child, I quickly began to realize that I had 2 options in front of me: conform to the stereotype that was expected of me, or conform to the whiteness that surrounded me. There was no in between. For me, this meant that I always felt self-conscious about being good at math because people would just say it was because I was Asian and not because I actually worked hard. It meant that whenever a boy asked me out, it was because he had the yellow fever and not because he actually liked me. It meant that for the longest time, my identity had formed around the fact that I was different, and I thought that being Asian was the only special thing about me. These effects were emphasized by the places where I lived. Don't get me wrong, only a small percentage of people were actually racist or even borderline racist, but the vast majority were just a little bit clueless. Now, I know you're probably thinking, what's the difference? Well, here's an example. Not racist can sound like I'm white and you're not. Racist can sound like I'm white, you're not, and that makes me better than you. But clueless sounds like I'm white, you're not, and I don't know how to deal with that. Now, I don't doubt for a second that these clueless people are still nice individuals with great intentions, but they do ask some questions that become pretty annoying after a while. Here are a few examples. You're Chinese? Oh my goodness, I have a Chinese friend. Do you know him? No, I don't know him. Because contrary to your unrealistic expectations, I do not know every single one of the 1.35 billion Chinese people who live on planet Earth. People also tend to ask, where does your name come from? And I really don't know how to answer that, so I usually just stick with the truth. My parents gave it to me. Where does your name come from? Don't even get me started on how many times people have confused me with a different Asian person. One time, someone came up to me and said, "Angie, I love your artwork," and I was super confused, so I just thanked them and walked away. But out of all of the questions, my favorite one is still the classic, "Where are you from?" Because I've lived in quite a few places, so this is how the conversation usually goes. Where are you from? Oh, I'm from Boise, Idaho. I see, but where are you really from? I lived in South Dakota for a while. Okay, what about before that? I lived in North Dakota. Okay, I'm just gonna cut straight to the chase here. I guess what I'm saying is, have you ever lived anywhere far away from here where people talk a little differently? Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yes, I have. I used to live in Texas. By then, they usually have just given up and wonder to themselves why I'm not one of the cool Asians like Jeremy Lin or Jackie Chan, or they skip the needless banter and go straight for the "where is your family from?" So just an FYI for all of you out there, that is the safest strategy. But as amusing as these interactions were, oftentimes they made me want to reject my own culture because I thought it helped me conform. I distanced myself from the Asian stereotype as much as possible by degrading my own race and pretending I hated math. And the worst part was, it worked. The more I rejected my Chinese identity, the more popular I became. My peers liked me more because I was more similar to them. I became more confident because I knew I was more similar to them. But as I became more and more Americanized, I also began to lose bits and pieces of myself, parts of me that I could never get back. And no matter how much I tried to pretend that I was the same as my American classmates, I wasn't. Because for people who have lived in the places where I lived, white is the norm, and for me, white became the norm too. For my 14th birthday, I received the video game Sims 3, which lets you create your own characters and control their lives. My 14-year-old self created the perfect little mainstream family, complete with a huge mansion and enormous swimming pool. I binge played the game for about 3 months and put it away and never really thought about it again until a few weeks ago when I came to a sudden realization. The family that I had custom designed was white. The character that I had designed for myself was white. Everyone I had designed was white. And the worst part was, this was by no means a conscious decision that I had made. Never once did I think to myself that I could actually make the characters look like me. Without even thinking, white had become my norm too. The truth is, Asian Americans play a strange role in the American melting pot. We are the model minority. Society uses our success to pit us against other people of color as justification that racism doesn't exist. But what does that mean for us Asian Americans? It means that we aren't quite similar enough to be accepted, but we aren't different enough to be loathed. We are in a perpetually gray zone, and society isn't quite sure what to do with us. So they group us by the color of our skin. They tell us that we must reject our own heritages so we can fit in with the crowd. They tell us that our foreignness is the only identifying characteristic of us. They strip away our identities one by one until we are foreign but not quite foreign, American but not quite American, individual but only when there are no other people from our native country around. I wish that I had always had the courage to speak out about these issues. But coming from one culture that avoids confrontation and another that is divided over race, how do I overcome the pressure to keep the peace while also staying true to who I am? And as much as I hate to admit it, oftentimes I don't speak out, because if I do, it's at the risk of being told that I'm too sensitive, or that I get offended too easily, or that it's just not worth it. But at what point are people willing to admit that, yes, race issues are controversial, but that's precisely the reason why we need to talk about them? I just turned 18, and there are still so many things that I don't know about the world, but what I do know is that it's hard to admit that you might be part of the problem, that all of us might be part of the problem. So instead of giving you a step-by-step guide on how to not be racist towards Asians, I will let you decide what to take from this talk. All I can do is share my story. My name is Carolyn, my favorite color is purple, and I play the piano but not so much the violin. I have 2 incredibly supportive, hardworking parents, and 1 very awesome 10-year-old brother. I love calculus more than anything, despise eating rice, and I'm a horrendous driver. But most of all, I am proud of who I am. A little bit American, a little bit Chinese, and a whole lot of both. Thank you.
All right, so I'll give you all a minute to sort of reflect on that video. So thank you all for your time and watching that short TED Talk with us. I saw in the chat, some of the personal experiences that came up, and then agreement on the questions that Canwin poses in the video. And we're going to talk about some of those questions today on our panel. So without further ado, again, my name is Versha Anderson. I'm a communication faculty here at PVCC, as well as our DEIE director and co-chair of the DEIE committee with Dr. Norma Chandler. We're really excited and pleased today to have 4 of our colleagues serving as panelists. I'm going to put a link to their full bios in the chat, so you may peruse them at length. But I will read abridged versions of them to help kick things off. So today we have with us first Dr. Vaswati Ghosh, originally from Bombay, a large metropolitan city in India. She completed her bachelor's in history and then went on to complete her master's in history at the University of Bombay. She began teaching at St. Xavier's Degree College in Bombay and also became interested in completing her doctoral studies at this time. She ended up pursuing her degree at the University of London, United Kingdom, at the School of Oriental and African Studies. So really interesting. You can read more about her background and her experiences, both personally and professionally. Next, we have Mr. Mike Ho, who is our Director of Student Life and Leadership at PVCC. He has a Bachelor's of Arts degree in philosophy from Holy Names College in Oakland, California, and a master's degree in student personnel administration from Western Washington University. Prior to being a part of Maricopa, Mike's worked in various fields, including software consulting, career counseling, environmental education, and college student housing. Next, we have Dr. Carolyn Miller joining us, and Carolyn has been with MCCCD since 2006, currently serving as the Director of Instructional Services and Support at PVC. In 2000, she earned a Bachelor of Arts in Education from Arizona State University West, a Master of Education from Northern Arizona University in 2004, and in 2011, completed her doctoral degree in Educational Leadership through the University of Phoenix. And then finally, we have Dr. Kishore Dash joining us. Kishore is the director of the Entrepreneurship Education Center at PVCC and a residential faculty in the Business IT division. Prior to coming to PV, he was an associate professor of the global business at Thunderbird School of Global Management and has spent most of his life as an educator in global business, business consultant, and director of customized corporate learning and leadership programs in the US and around the world. So again, we are really pleased to have such a wonderful panel joining us to really help us reflect on Asian stereotypes in their experiences. So, without further ado, the first question that we wanted to ask the panel is what stuck out to you from the video? And to go in line with the bios, if it's okay, Vaswati, we'll start with you to kick things off.
Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you, Varsha, for the beautiful introduction of everyone, and we are so glad to be here today. About the TED Talks, well, I was surprised in some ways about what she was saying, but not too surprised as well, because it's pretty well known about the stereotypes that she was addressing. So in terms of having her speak about the questions that came to her as a person of Asian descent, they were pretty, I'm pretty familiar with those kind of questions, for myself, particularly because I come from India and I have been asked by others, some individuals here, oh, where are you from? And I would say, initially, I would say, not anymore. I have changed my answer since I've been living here. I would say, oh, I'm Indian. So I have had the question asking, follow up was, so which tribe do you belong to? So, well, that led to a big answer from myself because I'm a history professor. So, it went on to, talking about Columbus making a big mistake, trying to find people like us and landing up in the Caribbean islands. So, anyhow, the very fact that I there are individuals who who would like to know about more about people from different parts of the world, because I really like the aspect from the talk as well, that I always welcome the questions, because most of the time the intent of the other person is to know more about me. So I never felt that I was being just singled out by somebody else to know where are you from, because I was, most of the time, the people who spoke to me were genuinely interested in who I was and where I was from. So I welcome the questions that I was asked around for all these years that I've been here. So in that sense, it kind of resonates to what the young girl was talking about.
Thank you, Vaswati. Mike, did you have any initial reactions?
Yeah, I have quite a few, so I'll have to try and tailor my thoughts for the sake of brevity. But one of the things that always stands out to me, well, first of all, I'm Mike Ho. I'm Chinese and Hawaiian, and part of why I like participating on this particular panel is to remind people this is Asian and Pacific Islander Month. So a lot of times Pacific Islanders get grouped in with Asians. I happen to be both, but I also know, as a result of both, those distinctions between the two. And what always stands out to me is that Asian is a pretty large umbrella in which, when people get confused with each other, it's failing to take into account that there's 43 at least different Asian countries. And then within that, within the Pacific Island group, there's at least 3 different major groups of Pacific Islanders, including Micronesians, Melanesians, and Polynesians. And so what always stands out to me is that when there's an attempt to try and group Asians together, it really misses the diversity of the different ethnicities within that racial category. And so for me, where this conversation gets very important and also sometimes very painful, is that there are things about my Hawaiian identity that I'm incredibly proud of that tends to get absorbed into this larger Asian identity. And there's parts of my Chinese identity as well that gets lost when we're just grouped as a monolithic Asian group that tends to have many characteristics which get recognized, such as hardworking, diligent, very communal. Some of those are common to all of us, but at the same time, those distinctions between us also do not seem to get addressed when we're all grouped together. So part of why I like to participate in these conversations, one is to keep the conversations intellectually honest, to make sure that people remember that this is both Asian Pacific Islander celebration, and also because I do think that there's some Asian American stereotypes, Asian Pacific Island stereotypes such as the model minority myth that the speaker was talking about, that still follow us into professional life as well. It isn't something that just is at the educational levels. It also follows us into the workplace, and sometimes those expectations about what the Asian American workload is capable of tends to, in many ways, work against us with some of the harder tasks, the expectation that we were not going to push back, the expectations that we will do the job that's asked no matter how ridiculous or how time consuming it is. So part of what I like to do is be able to speak out and speak on behalf of Asian Pacific Islanders to let people know too that some of those stereotypes still need to be challenged even into our professional lives. So thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Mike. And you bring up a good point about the naming of this month. As many of you can probably see from our landing page, we also add that clarifier of Indian Heritage Month as well. And I think that's some of the conflation that happens when Asian is communicated to some individuals. Those nuances, and like Mike said, the 43 different countries that are represented across that identity sometimes get minimized. Carolyn, anything that stuck out with you from the video?
So it's very fascinating because I'm biracial. So my father is Caucasian Irish, my mother is full Korean, and I have a brother who has dual citizenship who's just a year older than I was. So, I mean, we just barely moved here, and then I was born in the United States. And so I agreed to the conversation because I want to see what happens organically. And most people who know me know that I try to work on intentions. And so when people are asking me questions, I'm hoping that they want, my perspective, my thoughts and whatever. And then we have the dialogue. And so I found it really interesting with this young lady in the video that I was born in the early 60s. And so to hear her, because I'm assuming I could almost be her mother's age, hearing her story still brought back a lot of experiences that I've experienced through my lifetime here. But also, she mentioned that she was from Idaho, and I was also from Idaho. And so, while things have changed, things have still stayed the same. So, I like to assume that we're all working on the best of intentions, and I'm always happy to have dialogue with people who are just curious, who want to ask questions and are inquiry based to get to know each other at that level.
Thank you, Carolyn. I really appreciate that accent on curiosity and the best of intentions. Kishore.
Hi, yes, thank you, Versa. It's such a wonderful people around, and I'm so delighted to be here. My name is Kishore Dash, and I did my master's at the University of Delhi, came here, University of Delhi in India, and came here for my PhD. And obviously, as a part of my career, I've written a lot of books and articles, but at least one case study that I would like to bring to the attention of this panel, I wrote some time back, which was selected as the best case study by Harvard Business Review. It's called McDonald's in India. I always think about it, McDonald's could understand that diversity aspect so well, so that's one of the things. But coming back to this TED Talk, what I thought or what struck me most is the girl is introducing a concept, I call it diversity distance. So she is actually introducing that particular concept, and the way I talk about is diversity distance matters or diversity distance doesn't matter. And to understand that particular diversity distance, I'll just give you one example. The example is, if someone asks us, we never say we are from North America, we never say we are from, South America. Well, some of us might say. So saying this, that I'm from Asia, obviously it doesn't really make sense. And the issue that I'm trying to introduce here is this diversity distance. That simply means, anyone who is coming from outside of the United States or born and brought up in the United States, to me, that attitude, that behavior, that diversity sensitivity is influenced by what I call 4 variables or K's. C is the culture, A is the age, as Carolyn is trying to introduce, and obviously, Carolyn, I'm there with you. So the age, so your understanding and your behavior and attitude differs from, let's say, a 18 years old to a 58 years old. So that's, and then geography matters. Geography matters. Which part of the United States you are coming from, or which part of the world you are coming from, and then one of the last component is the economy. So in this page, culture, age, geography, and economy. And the economic status, even we don't have to think about that, also impacts your attitude and behavior. So I was struck by that diversity distance that she's talking about, and which is a real thing in our society. And it's always good to talk about that and deal with it rather than to escape from that diversity distance.
Thank you, Kishore. I think we could probably invite you back to do another session on that diversity distance to dig into that topic at another time. For this next question, I'm going to open it up to all 4 of you. So whoever would like to share, if the talk brought up any particular moments or interactions that you have had. Any of the panelists, feel free to unmute and offer a particular interaction or moment that maybe the video brought up for you.
I might as well go in myself. What my reaction to the video? Can I say that?
Sure, of course. And could you introduce yourself for the group?
Oh, okay. My name is Jackson Nguyen, and I work at the computer lab at Chandler Gilbert Community College at the Williams campus. And obviously, I work for Sonia, who's with us today. And I watched the video. The first 2, I was like, oh, no, those questions. It's like the cringe is there. I was just like face palming. I was like for 2 minutes, like, oh, I know it's a joke, but it's like, I know it happens. It's still like, ah, my brain just went, the cringe is there. Like, but that's that's like being serious with a little bit of humor. But like the one that struck, another one that didn't surprise me, but like I kind of expected it too. Is like, where are you from? Like, oh, I had a thought about that. The president asked me that when I was a kid, when I was younger, or in my young college life. But if they do, if they actually ask, I'll go per. I usually want to I usually just say I am from this state or that state, and usually they don't. They accepted that. But if they did actually ask and try to delve deeper, I'd be thinking, what's the you're thinking of this? If they're gonna ask me where you're from multiple times, I would ask. So you're asking what's my ethnicity, right? That's probably that's my thought on that second part. The last one that surprised me the most is like the Sims character creation. That one kind of surprised me because like when you create a character and you create it in like however you think you want, you realize, oh, like I didn't create it in like my image or the way I want to, but that's just because like the subconscious level is like, oh, that blew my mind a bit because like I didn't think about it how denying your Asian American Pacific Islander identity for a long time would actually affect your choices and things. I was like, whoa, like yeah.
Well, thank
I
you,
didn't think about it
Jackson.
that way. So
Yeah,
sorry if I went on a little too long, but
no,
yeah.
you're totally good. I think you brought up a lot of different areas that the panelists are going to talk on, kind of that tension, right? And what what people are asking you and what they really mean to ask you, and then the ways in which the visibility of what we see in society and how we're socialized, we don't even realize how it affects how we see ourselves until we have that opportunity to sort of put a mirror up to it. So thank you, Jackson. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So going back, oh yeah, sorry, Carolyn, go ahead. Yeah, so going back to the question, any particular moments or interactions that you've had?
For me, that question, where are you from? I've gotten that my whole life. And most of the time, like I said, I think people are just curious and I make a game out of it. But I will tell you honestly that those of us that fall within Chinese, Japanese, Korean and stuff, we always ask each other, where are you from? Because we're trying to find some ways that we have some similarities. Like, oh, where are you from, right? And so I mean, I've seen those of us in the Asian community, especially like we'll go to the Korean market and stuff, people always want to know, where are you from? Just like I think maybe Kishore kind of here in the demographics, if we hear somebody has a different tone in their voice or enunciation, we ask them a lot of times, oh, where are you from? You sound like you're from the South or the North or the East or the West, right? And so I would hope that we're a little mindful of how do we begin having a conversation with somebody if we don't try to ask a question or two about getting to know them, right? And then also I've done a little bit of research and studying on social class, and one of the main questions that people will ask in middle class are, oh, what do you do for a living? So is it any really difference in asking what do you do for a living versus where are you from, if you think you might have something in common? So I just want to be mindful of that, because I know in the Asian communities that I've hung around with or been a part of, it's normal for us to ask, where are you from, right? And so maybe it's the tone in how you say that or the circumstance in which you say it, but I'm really not offended if somebody asks me, because I always make them guess first. I always say, well, where do you think I'm from? And then they try to answer it, and that's how I know what they're getting from. Oh, you may look Japanese. I'm like, no. How about Hawaiian? No. And so we just make a game out of it. So I think it's something to be mindful of.
Thank you, Carolyn. I appreciate that. How about others? Any particular
Yeah.
interactions or moments? Oh, go ahead, Vaswati.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, Carolyn, because you said something that I just do that so often in my class, because I teach US history, Western civilization, as well as world politics. So I get a whole gamut of student population in my class. So when I'm at the first day, when they walk in, they're not sure about me, and then and then we start having a discussion, conversation, and so I introduce my name, and and this is exactly what I do is I know they have a lot of questions in their mind, and I ask them, okay, now from my name, tell me where I'm from originally, because I'm American, so tell me, where I'm from, what's my ethnicity. So that's when we get a whole lot of answers, and many times they do guess right, and sometimes it's like way off the charts, and I say, oh, I wish I was there, I never visited that country, but I wish I would, in the future. And then there's a lot of questions that they ask, and I tell them about India, and so on. So exactly this, that I really welcome this kind of conversation that we can have in the classroom, which I do that every semester on the first day of class, as well as outside, where people are very, very, genuinely interested in knowing what's my ethnicity, and then they ask me questions. And also because my English, personally, I think my accent is all mixed up. It's like all over the place, but then they would say, oh, you speak very differently, you speak very nicely, maybe because I lived in Europe for some years. So how do you have this pretty accent or something like that? Because they were not kind of assuming that I would speak any different or anything. It's just that my accent kind of made them kind of stop for a minute and kind of ask, oh, where have I lived before? So these conversations are really welcoming, and I enjoy that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Vaswati. And I think, again, both you and Carolyn are really highlighting that curiosity component where a lot of people are coming from and inviting that curiosity and responding with kindness, information, and sometimes good humor as well.
Yeah, I think Barsha, I just add one more thing. I agree with Vaswati what you said, and even Carolyn, right? The pronunciation part of it is obviously something interesting, So what Vaswati said, I can attest to that, So they will be saying, oh, okay, so after listening to me, they will say, where you from? That's one thing. The other thing I just wanted to add is, that once they know that you are from India, you are typically associated with a IT professional. So the issue is, you know everything about
and
IT.
Doctors.
So
and doctors.
And doctors, obviously. So those are the two career kind of associated with. And I have actually faced it in a lot of airports and all those kinds of things. People will come and say, hey, this is what I'm having a problem. Can you just fix it? So that's one aspect, definitely true. But the other thing that I wanted to obviously bring to the attention of everyone here, and Carolyn just mentioned about it. It's kind of look, a Japanese is different than a Chinese. A Chinese is different than our friend here, Vietnamese, right? A Vietnamese is different than, even Korean. So even if, sometimes, the look wise, probably there is some similarities, but when you ask a Japanese as a Asian, meaning, mostly maybe Chinese or those kind of things, and Korean, that kind of stuff, that's very uncomfortable. So this is where I say, that diversity sensitivity is such a critical element in dealing with the different kinds of people.
Thank you, Kishore. And Lily, Lily, I see you.
Sorry.
Offer. No need to apologize.
Yeah, I was helping some students from Ask Library.
Would you kindly introduce yourself too to the group for those who may not know you?
Okay, and my real name is Li Kang, not Lily. But people sometimes ask, some of my Chinese friends, they take Anglo-Saxon, first name. And for me, it's natural because my nickname in China is Lily. My mom called me Lily. So I feel like I'm not too far to please someone. Okay. Another thing is when I'm in class teaching, and I do exactly the same. Vaswati and Carolyn, I ask them to guess. And some of them look at my last name. They said, I'm from Korea. I said, you are so right. But I said, Kang, K-A-N-G, is a very popular Korean last name, but it's also found in China. And but it's very rare. Out of the 100, Chinese surnames, my name's very rare. Out of 10 Chinese folks, maybe about 9 people didn't know about my last name. So it's kind of a little bit educational. Another thing I do is I kind of maybe play a joke with my own accent. I said, how do you like my Chinglish? And they all give a big laugh, the whole class, whatever. But they say you speak very clearly. We understand you. They give me some positive feedback. Another thing I brought in is I work with our nursing students over the past several years, and there's a big component about cultural competency. When they go out to the real world, they interact with Asian people, and a lot of the things in the Chinese and Korean, Vietnamese, and we all celebrate the Lunar New Year. We all have some of the influence from Confucianism and Buddhism, and some of the practices, cultural norms. I also give them some even personal experience of going to hospital, giving childbirth. If a nurse brought me a cup of ice, I'm so shocked. I tell them, no, in my culture, it's all warm liquid. So kind of using that as a teaching moment. So, and I don't think it's a big deal. I don't feel it's negative or whatever. No, yeah. So thank you.
Thank you. And I appreciate that accent on education, right? That's what this is all about. How are we educating and helping us all to be better informed individuals? Mike, go ahead.
I just want to add one more thing too. Getting back to the idea that there's at least 43 different Asian countries and 3 different major ethnic groups. Where it affects me personally is on any given day on my college campus, I can get mixed up for one of the 2 other Asian men on our campus. So if you don't know Sam T, he's a program specialist in my office, and the number of times I get asked whether or not I'm Sam, or he gets asked whether he's me. Hugh, who works in our fiscal office, also I get confused with. Now, I've got glasses, so I definitely don't look like Hugh, and I'm definitely more Pacific Islander in skin tone, so I know in that way I don't look like Hugh. And then as far as Sam goes, I'm about 20 years older than him, and yet it never fails. We have this running joke in our office where we have begun to kind of keep tallies of the number of times we get confused. And so for me, what's kind of disappointing and just a bit sad is that I've been at this college for about 17 years, and yet at the same time, I still get, my identity gets lost into this, whatever this group of Asians is, and that's where I feel like some of this lumping of us, that's where I experience us most, this issue most directly, when we get lumped in together without seeing just the individualism and the individual makeups of the diverse Asian people on our campus.
Thank you, Mike. And I think this gets back at a comment Carolyn kicked us off with, right? As much as things have changed, there's still a lot of things that are still the same and a lot of issues that still exist, regardless of the education about those nuances. We sort of have already touched on the question about how y'all feel when you're asked, where are you from? So if it's okay with you all, I'm going to move us on to the next question about any time when someone has misconstrued or misunderstood you in terms of being Asian, Pacific Islander, or Indian. So again, anytime you have felt someone has misconstrued or misunderstood in terms of you being Asian, Pacific Islander, or Indian. So again, whoever would like to offer their insights, please feel free.
Well, I'll start just real briefly. And one of the things that I know for me, I get tagged with a label as shy in group meetings. And for me, there's a couple things culturally that are at play. One is that I definitely have been taught to defer to people who I perceive as older. And so it's one of the things that I just wait my turn, right? I have to wait for people to be able to finish speaking before I speak. And the other part of that too is in terms of just cultural history that I was raised with, the cultural traditions that I was raised with, you definitely don't interrupt. And so one of the things I had to get used to when I was first working in Boston is if you don't fight to get a word in edgewise, you're not going to get a chance to speak. And so that behavior of waiting until the last person has finished speaking doesn't work well in group meetings, but it's something that is even at my age, it's still something that I find a very difficult time fighting, just because even though I can do it and I've been doing it successfully over the last number of years, it just kills me inside, because if I take that same behavior back to my family, either in Hawaii or in parts of California where there's a pretty big ethnic enclave, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine the amount of shame I would bring upon my family for being that outspoken. So it is a challenge and a chore sometimes to be able to speak up while I'm waiting for other people to finish. But it's also something that I've had to learn to do, and it's something that I've had to teach my kids to do as well. But it has definitely labeled me as shy, when in fact I really have been trying to unconsciously, I think I've been living out the expectations that I was raised with.
Thank you, Mike. And I think we had talked about this before, those expectations, right? Those expectations that have been put on you because of the culture we're in and the expectations that you vacillate between with the culture you were raised in. So Carolyn, and then Vaswati, I see.
And so, Mike, this kind of reminds me of the prep conversation that we had going into today, and something that I would hope that we don't lose and we can bring it out. And so I think some of that, as you spoke about, when we went and visited Korea with my mother, who had not been back to her homeland in 37 years, because when she brought us over here to the United States. She knew she had to. And again, you have to remember the times in the 60s and stuff. It would have been more devastating for her to have biracial children in Korea than coming over here, not speaking the language or knowing anything. She had no idea what she was getting into coming here. And unfortunately, her and my father did not make it, because I do believe of the time in the 60s of having biracial children and having a wife who did not speak the language or understand. However, my mother, when she came here, she left her country behind, and she said, you were going to be raised as American children. And she never taught us anything about the Korean culture, right? I didn't even know I was really Korean until it was pointed out to me at school with other little kids that I was different, right? So I was always raised as an American child. I don't know how to speak Korean, rarely have Korean food. Love to go to the Korean market though, now that I'm older and stuff, but there was a lot that was missing from that. And I too, the reason I'm so outspoken is because being in a home where you have a mother who didn't speak English very well, didn't write it, didn't read it. And as a kid growing up in elementary school, I had to translate for my mother a lot, right? And then I had to advocate for her in other ways. And when you're a kid, a small kid, seeing how your parent is mistreated, you take on some emotions or physical well-being that you're out there trying to protect. And so that's why I think I've developed a voice for when I see an injustice being done. I have a lot of those flashbacks and memories, and that's why some people, I mean, who definitely know me on campus and throughout my years, know I'm not a very shy person, which would go against what they would typically think of for somebody who's an Asian woman and more of that submissive role. Because when I went back to Korea, those women were still cleaning floors on their hands and knees every day and didn't eat until after all the men eat. And so I definitely knew, and this was just a few years ago, so I definitely knew I would not do well in the Korean culture back in Korea. So I think it's really important that we really understand everybody as an individual and why they are who they are by asking questions, by being curious.
Yeah.
Thank you, Carolyn. Yeah, Vaswati, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So thank you. In line with what Mike and Carolyn is talking about, what I would like to point out are the cultural differences that come with people from all over the world. And it could be very small, and it could be something that is very different. And it's a process. No one can ever know the cultural background and the different norms of people from all over the world. At the same time, and Mike, it kind of resonates with me as well. When we are in the workplace in America, there is the existing norm is what most Americans are familiar with, the way the conversation runs, the way the meeting is set, the tone of the meeting. And initially, just like Mike, I had trouble even getting any word in, and being the only non-white person in my entire division, it was really like I was like sitting there, like just warming my seat for a few years. And when I realized that, hey, this is not getting me anywhere and I need to speak up. And I've changed a lot since then. The other thing is that the Asian culture, whether it's India, China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, there are some similarities there that people from Asia understand very easily, whereas people who have not been exposed to the Asian culture may not get it, is the eye contact. In India, direct eye contact is considered as aggressive many times. And so what happens when we have a conversation with another Indian, or anybody else in our own family or something, we are not always looking at each other. We talk, we look around, we do a whole lot of things, or or if somebody, especially a younger person, is is speaking with an elderly person, the younger person, it's sort of ingrown that we doesn't normally have an eye-to-eye contact, because that's seen as being, challenging. The younger person is challenging a person, and so on. So there is this very subtle difference in terms of eye contact, which Indians will not have. Whereas in here in America, eye contact is seen as a big thing. And I've had trouble in terms of when there has been some conversations here where I'm not looking directly at a person because for whatever reason, and the person misconstrues that as I being, disrespectful and so on. And so those kind of things really matter, in the sense that they can be misunderstood so badly and can become a problem for anyone and everyone interacting during that conversation. And that is very cultural. It comes from, different parts of the world. As Lily said, in my country, warm liquid is something that even I know, that, because I'm Asian, whereas a person coming from somewhere else may not know. So this is a big learning a path that we have right now. It's challenging, but I'm glad about the conversation, because nobody's going to know this right away, but the beginning of our learning has started. So I really like that. Thank you.
Thank you,
Vasa,
Vaswati.
I'll just build on what Vaswati said. This is this is just one of the things. If you're talking to State Department people, or the business people, and the general consciousness, India is not considered as a part of Asia. So anytime people talk about Asia, obviously India is not. But as Vaswati is saying, Indians, they consider it's part of the Asian, right? So that particular aspect needs to be understood. And then for that matter, I always say there's a Central Asia, there's a Southeast Asia, there's a East Asia, there is, the geography matters. But even today also, when we develop policies, or we do all those business strategies, Asia doesn't include India. So India becomes a kind of a separate entity, if you will. Now we are talking about Indo-Pacific region, right? So that's a very specific things that's coming into our language. And then you're it's a very brief example that misconstrued. One of the things I will share with you a personal experience very briefly. When I used to direct international field seminars at Thunderbird, I used to take a lot of executives to different parts of the world to expose them to the market entry strategies and business growth, all those kinds of stuff. 2001, September 11 happened. And then, those of you who will take a look at me, my picture, prior to 2001, I had a big mustache, So basically what happens is this, I used to take all those students to different parts of the world. And when coming back post 2001, I used to be randomly checked. And it's so many times I even told my executives, hey, move on, because they're going to randomly check me. And then, it was pretty kind of a uncomfortable behavior, if you will, right? So then I was talking to some people, and my friends suggested, hey, you know what? That mustache is the issue. And I took it off. So since then, I saw in the chat, the lost identity, but that's not the lost identity. But the basic thing is, I thought, that becomes a classic example how people misconstrue, people from different regions just by their appearance and all those kinds of stuff. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate you bringing that up. I think all four of you really highlighted the tension between how your cultural practices and cultural habits have others perceive you in different ways than your intention, and how that can lead to, like Vaswati was saying, some troublesome interactions, because there is that lack of wanting to understand why we do the things we do in the ways we do. Yeah, Lily.
I have one flashback while I was listening to Vaswati just now. One thing it was over 30 years ago. I had, in my university, I was a student in the foreign languages department, and we had 2 American teachers. One of them, I think she's in her 50s. Or 50, I think middle 50s. I know one instant was I went to her office to help her, and then we walked out, and going downstairs, she was carrying more load, books, bags, and I walked, I was right next to her. So, but without, maybe I don't remember even I said something, I reached out to help her. And she just stepped back and very suddenly. And I forgot the exact wording or whatever, but I know that that was a moment I learned a lesson. And don't offer your help to someone you perceive someone as older. I know I was maybe I was just about 20, I think, during that time. And in China, seniority is always respected. And also, you always on the street or wherever you see people, you always voluntarily help. For me, with my, American teacher, I thought it was just natural. It's a warm gesture. I want to help her, but she kind of shied away and give me some kind of look. But all these years, I remember that moment. And it's, maybe here, getting older is perceived, getting weaker. And so, that's something I learned. I always become a little more cautious.
Thank you, Lily. And again, yeah, I think this really gets at a lot of those nuances and cultural differences, whether it's in regards to age and deference in relation to that, the ways in which we use nonverbal communication, right? And then the ways in which what's happening politically, socially, and culturally affects how we just move through the world and how we're perceived by those around us. I really appreciate all your perspectives on your perceptions and experiences. This next question is about expectations. So what are the expectations you've experienced being an Asian, Pacific Islander, or Indian? Whether you feel these expectations have been explicitly put upon you or implicitly put upon you. So again, those expectations that you've experienced. So who would like to start us off?
I can go first. So one of the things that I appreciated in that little video is that she acknowledged, and I am willing to acknowledge, is I've had a lot of privilege and with being biracial, right? Because you can use it to your advantage, but then once you get it, you have some sort of responsibility to be mindful of it and be respectful of it, because that whole idea of being a model minority, minority, there's no doubt in my mind over my career, I have been hired because of being a minority, being a woman. But that comes with being able to respect that privilege. Yes, that got you through the door. Now, what do you do with that opportunity? What do you do with that privilege, right? And so also having the white, if you will, privilege. We all have privilege. And I think it's important to recognize that no matter who we are, what environment we are in. And so I've been able to use my gender, my age, my ethnicity, all of these other things for privilege in one area or another. But it's what you do with that privilege that really matters. So that's all I'll say there.
Thank you, Carolyn. And we could have, right, that might be a whole other session to really dive into privilege, and in many ways, right, that viewpoint of how does privilege allow you to open doors and create entry points and access for individuals that wouldn't have had it if you weren't in that position to advocate others and expectations that have been put on you?
I don't know.
I'll share something. Oh, someone else.
No, go ahead, Lily.
I think someone else wants to say.
Go ahead, Lily, and then Mike.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm thinking of parenting. As parents, I have two daughters. I think even looking at my kind of circle around me, and many of my friends, I think give a lot of pressure to their children. And even the extended family, even back in China, also give me pressure about what how I should maybe foster, I don't know, my daughter's career. Especially when they were choosing college majors, and many of them want them to go to, I don't know, like I'm thinking of Kishore, and also, some of the hard, accounting, or medicine, or, computer science. So easier to find a job. Or some of them say, don't go to those where you need a lot of people skills, dealing with a lot of communication or whatever. Maybe just, do your job. But I know some of my friends also, many children are quite successful, going to Ivy Leagues or whatever. But I'm one of those. I did allow one of my daughters to follow her passion, which doesn't make a lot of money. And she's still learning, try to find her focus. And sometimes I struggle a little bit myself, because her major, my older daughter, is in fashion design. And she went to a very expensive school, actually, in New York City, Parsons, but I know that helped her to be who she is. But sometimes I struggle. How do I behave as a parent? Do I regret the decision? Or, for her to learn to blossom in whatever way. Yeah, in this country, my children were born in this country. Sometimes I respect. I had to look. I cannot use my past, totally my, how I was, brought up, and my culture to impose onto them. It's like sometimes I talk to our CPD 150. Those students. I'm their liaison librarian. Sometimes I know how to balance your passion. You have a passion, there's a reason for that, but how to balance. And so that's somewhere I'm still learning. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Lily. And then Mike, sorry, go ahead.
No problem. No, it's one of the things that I've somewhat experienced, but I also see backed up in the research, is the expectation that Asian Pacific Islanders will be the workers, but not necessarily the leaders or the managers. So we know that Asian Americans make up 5% of the population, but only 1% of corporate boardrooms, 2% of college presidents nationwide. And even though they're the largest represented groups of partners, associates of law firms, they make partner at a rate far less than all other ethnic groups. And so there's an expectation, or at least an assumption, that these are employees who can be trusted to do the hard work and often get the hardest tasks, but they're somehow not allowed or not given opportunities to advance. So this is called and known as the bamboo ceiling in much of the literature, that even though it's unspoken, that there's a ceiling or that Asian Americans can't get past. And perhaps some of this is some of the cultural drawbacks that we've talked about, but this isn't just, say, localized. It seems to be the trend nationally. And so the expectation for the part of Asian Pacific Islanders is that all of our lives, our academic success, should have led us to career advancement and career success that duplicated or replicates some of those collegiate and other educational successes. And yet, historically, that hasn't happened, either in the corporate environment, public environment, educational environment. So I think the expectation somehow is that we are not prepared to perform well in leadership opportunities. That is something that I know that the Asian Pacific Island Association is really working hard to be able to make ourselves more visible, and in many ways do a lot of peer support to train and coach each other to be more vocal in those spaces where we need to be more vocal.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that, and that's great to know the work that the Asian Pacific Islander Association is doing to break through that bamboo ceiling, as the research calls it. We have a little bit of time right now before we move into some closing questions, and I did want to make sure we created some space for other questions, comments, and curiosities that you all have for our panelists, or even our panelists may have for one another. So please do feel free to unmute yourself or add a question to the chat if there's anything you'd like to ask more about or find out. And then Carolyn, I saw your hand go up. Was there something you wanted to add before we move into that?
I just wanted to ask Mike on the research that he read, if that's because, the generalizing and stereotyping that Asians usually are more collaborative and we don't usually seek competitive, isolation, oneism or whatever to compete for some of these jobs. If that came out in any of the research, is, it could be difficult for us to be seen as somebody who is that individual go-getter and willing to, take on the challenges to run a large organization.
What I've seen is just this mix of professionals knowing what the expectations are of the workplace, and then also just kind of saddled with this question that's unique to Asian Americans. Am I just an ill fit because of my traditions, my backgrounds, my ways of being in the world are not compatible with the workforce, or is there another systemic issue? And so the literature that I've read points to the effect, but not necessarily the cause. But the writings that I've read from Asian American researchers on this issue seem to also entertain the idea that Asian Americans will need to do some behavior modification for no other reason than just to learn how to play the game better, so to speak.
Thanks, Mike. Other questions, comments? Sorry.
I think, Varsa, I'll just add one input to Mike's observations. More or less, I accept that proposition. So although, kind of industry like technology, finance, those kind of industries are opening up a little bit for this, Asian Pacific Islanders or Indian, if you include them, to go up in the ladder. Meaning for these leadership positions, they are accepting. Just the examples like Google and Microsoft. So they are headed by the Indian origin, and even Pepsi for a long time, Indian women. And then the finance, Citibank, for example, and all those kinds of different financial institutions are accepting that I've seen Indians at the top positions. So that industry is opening up a little bit, but more or less, Mike, you are spot on.
Other questions, comments, and curiosities for our panelists? And again, feel free to either unmute or go ahead and add your question, comment, or curiosity to the chat. Karen, yeah, go ahead.
I want to actually express my appreciation for PBCC for the opportunity for me to, run the Lunar New Year celebration for the past 8 years. There are many people from the administration and also from faculty and staff, Mike, and many people gave me support. It takes a big team to do some of this, celebration and to introduce, arts, some other talents or whatever, in my own capability to bring in, the network and to bring in to PBCC, and also sometimes we also shared to Maricopa, and some of my social media network, my Asian network, they were also commenting because sometimes I put some of those events on my, Chinese WeChat. You know, I don't use Facebook as much, but they were so happy. And even local Asian community here, they pay attention to this too. They come to attend some of our events. They were appreciative of our college for doing this. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Lily. And I don't know if you have the link handy to the Lunar New Year landing page. Feel free to put it in the chat for those who hadn't had a chance to interact with all that wonderful content, right? There's always time to interact with it even after the holiday has passed. Karen, go ahead. I saw you had a question or a comment.
I think about like feeling included, and if at our meetings at PV, for instance, have you ever been sitting at a meeting at PV and wanted to say something? And do you have this wish list that you've had in your back pocket about what could leaders do to make you in your style feel more included in a meeting, like a tactic or something that could happen to make our PV meetings more inclusive?
Thanks, Karen.
Karen, is that for the panelists, your question? Okay. Thank you. Thank you. It's a great question. How can I make my the meetings and my colleagues make me feel more inclusive? Well, I was reading the comments, and something did jump out to me, that the leadership at PVCC, whether it is right up the top at the administrative level, or at the other levels coming down to the division chairs or managers, and so on, I think it depends a lot on the leadership. Because in a meeting, it is usually the leader of the group or the division is the one who's hosting, who's taking the meeting forward, and the kind of tone he sets in that meeting reflects to the rest of the colleagues. And I believe the leadership should make, and I did bring this out, and I think this is something that we need, it's a work in progress, is have more training or more emphasis given to people who occupy leadership positions at our college, to make them be more aware of inclusiveness, or inclusiveness based on diversity of any person's diversity. It's not ethnicity, it's all kinds of diversity that we have in our own community and college, to be mindful of them and make them inclusive, engage them. Go ahead, and if they see someone sitting quietly by themselves in a meeting or not being heard, whereas there are some, this is usually, I've seen this happen over and over again. I don't know if others have, but PVCC, I'm in my 16th year. There are some individuals in a meeting who will take all the time to talk, and nobody calls on them to say, hey, you know what, it was great sharing your ideas, but let's hear the others. Kind of, it just, there's a politeness that extends, or I don't know, this is like, okay, if somebody wants to talk and they decide they're going to take the whole meeting as a thing for themselves to talk about, nobody calls on them to say, hey, there are others who we would like to share. So I believe the leadership really needs to change, make actual changes to how they interact in the meetings, and have them become more aware. Probably give them training, required training, that, hey, you need to be aware of the diversity, of different kinds of diversity, and make everybody included. So that would be my take. Thanks, Karen.
Any others want to comment and offer feedback on Karen's question? And it's a nice segue, Karen, into some of our closing questions that touch on that as well, as far as what can the college and leadership do, and what would you like your colleagues to know about working with you? So any other comments or questions on Karen's particular question?
And this is Carolyn. I just wanted to say, I did put it in the chat, and I'm not sure if Jen is still on with us, but she really said something last week that resonated with me, and I keep thinking about that. Not only the meetings that I put on, but the meetings that I attend. I'm really more mindful now. Did they just invite me to invite me? or did they really want to hear what I have to say, right? Because there's a difference of being invited to a meeting versus being invited to participate. And I think for me, it's an area I can really tell right off the bat when I've been invited to participate versus just invited to attend. And so really getting back to intentions, why are we really inviting people to attend versus to participate?
Thanks, Carolyn.
I think I will say this. That's a great question, Karen. That's the point that Carolyn is making. Invited to attend or invited to participate. Invited to participate will be much more realistic when the meeting is small. And when it's a large meeting, and with so many people around and all those kinds of stuff, time is a factor, and obviously other things that my colleagues have mentioned. But I always think that if the meeting group is small, participation becomes more effective in that particular context. So just to inclusive part of it, I think make the meeting numbers small. That way, more and more people will be, kind of not only allowed to participate, or maybe they will feel like it will be a pressure on them. So kind of, I have to share my thoughts, or I have to contribute to this meeting. So size of meeting is an important thing.
Thank you, Kishore. And I think that's where virtually we've been able to leverage those breakout rooms to engage more of that participation across different events. We have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to our final 2 questions of the session. So the first one is for all of the panelists: what do you want colleagues to know about working with you and serving Asian, Pacific Islander, or Indian students? Whoever would like to go, feel free to kick things off. So again, what do you want colleagues to know about working with you and serving Asian, Pacific Islander, and/or Indian students?
So I'll mention the students part if I can. I'm sorry, Carolyn. With the students part, I would just say when you're writing letters of recommendation for Asian Pacific Island students, make sure you ask about the whole person, because some of the things that get written about Asian Pacific Island students tend to be they're diligent, they're hardworking, they stay on task, and that's great. But it also, to the person reading that recommendation, will reinforce some of the stereotypes about Asian Pacific Islanders and not seeing them as the broad spectrum that makes up Asian Pacific Islanders. And so that can put them at a competitive disadvantage when they're looking at their next institution. So rather than just looking on their academic work, trying to ask them a little bit about some of the other parts of their lives. And the person who I think did this really well, I have to shout out Dr. Ruby. He wrote a recommendation letter for my daughter, and my daughter typically can be very quiet in classes, diligent and hardworking. But when he wrote his recommendation letter, he made an effort to pull in those other parts of her personality, that she was a volunteer at her church, and that she was also volunteering on campus. So that way, the recommendation with a last name like Ho just didn't stand out as being the monolithic, hardworking Asian American student, but could also recognize that this is a diverse and complex person that can do quite a lot of things, not just be academically successful.
Thank you, Mike. I think that's really important for us all to consider when we're writing letters of recommendation, designing our coursework, anything to serve students. Are we looking at the whole student, right? Carolyn, go ahead.
I think probably for me, what I often hear is, and some of you on the call can agree or disagree, but I'm often accused of being a lot younger than I am. And while I appreciate that, I think it also has its disadvantages, because I'm often told, well, you have plenty of time, don't worry about it, you're so young, and this and that. And I don't think that age is necessarily appropriate to bring into the conversation if it's based on skill sets and required skill sets. And so I think we have to be really mindful too when we're looking at somebody and making some false judgments on, no matter what it is, right? That just happened to be mine as far as with age that I've experienced most often is my age. They don't ask me how old I am by any means. There's just this assumption, because then once they do find out, then then that's when it's brought up. Oh my gosh, I never thought you were that old, or whatever. And so I think it's important that we're just, I don't know. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Carolyn. Kishore, Vaswati, Lily. Yeah, go ahead, Vaswati.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry,
Okay.
Vaswati. We'll do Vaswati and then Kishore, and then Lily if you have
Okay.
anything to add.
Okay.
Thank you, Varsha. About Indians, well, first of all, I love to say that most of my colleagues are very, very respectful and mindful of interacting with Indians, and especially in my building. And I love the fact when they have a question about India, or a student that who might be in their class who's Indian, from India, they come to me and ask me what they should do if they have an issue with that student. And and it always makes me feel very valued that they are asking me about what they what my opinion would be or suggestions would be. So I really like that although I am not considered as, no, I wouldn't tell that I know everything about India, but at the very fact that I'm seen as a resource. But most of my colleagues, in terms of sharing with them about our culture or something that they have an issue with, or the other fact that my own division chair, she's Stephanie Bjork. She's wonderful in because she teaches women in other cultures. She has her students always coming to me requesting interviews, and students tell me, you're the only person I know is a woman of color or of another culture. I'm like, whoa. And so I share my perspective, and I I give them all the answers that they need. However, at the same time, there are, based on the student's question or the colleagues, there are some stereotype that does come up in questions of Indian culture, as well as, mostly in academic sense, but sometimes it's cultural. The whole question has come up about arranged marriages, and they believe that every Indian who's growing up in India is forced into an arranged marriage. But they're surprised that I didn't have an arranged marriage. And so this kind of, it's very, the certain stereotype that happens from a person who comes from India, and they, so I believe more conversations with colleagues as well as students kind of brings, as I said, this is a learning, it's a learning in process that would really make the difference to, and that I try to be a voice out there in my college, into the most of my capacity, to be able to be there to answer questions and welcome this kind of interaction. So I would like that to continue with my colleagues and students. Thank you.
Thank you, Vaswati. And I think highlighting that accessibility that you bring while being learning centered and always focusing on that education and awareness, it's really pivotal. Kishore and then Lily.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Basra. That's and again, I'll just build on what others said. For a long time, I've been thinking about this particular issue, and it's how we can make our colleagues, or at least more and more my faculty colleagues, be a part of this inclusiveness that we are talking about. And this my thought here is driven by 3 goals, 3G. Maybe we can make it 5G later on, but at least 3G. Let me stay with that. So that 3 goals that I specifically have thought about is one college vision. And we may think about one Maricopa vision later on, but one college, one PVCC vision, student ready, and then serve the community. So those are the 3 goals which have driven me to think about creating a kind of a learning institute, if you will, in conjunction with Diversity Institute, and then learning community, and all kinds of stuff. We can actually create an institute, and the example I'm thinking about is Critical Thinking Academy that we have at PVCC. So basically, this is for the first year faculty, and maybe other faculty can join that. We can create a cohort and we can introduce some design thinking principles in that particular meeting. And then whatever we learn, and I have some thought how to design that particular course. And once, and again, that, designing the course based on the deep customer empathy or deep student empathy, where, our faculty colleagues and administrative staff, they will understand the student needs better. So we can introduce that concept, and the goal here is, in the learning week, for example, we can create a video recording of that particular activities that we will do. We can present it at the learning week and at the seminars, different kinds of conferences. We can actually present those ideas, which I think will be very powerful. So that's kind of a first year faculty cohort, and if other faculty also can join that, and obviously the faculty must be incentivized. Whatever way we can incentivize them, the way Critical Academy does, that will be a real powerful way to bring all our faculty together and be on the same page to serve those three goals. One, college vision, student readiness, and servicing the community.
Thank you, Kishore. And then Lily, yeah, so we're right at the
Yeah, I know.
one. So Lily,
One.
please, yeah, do
Yeah,
share
very
some.
quick. I also want to actually mention Kishore has been inviting me and Paula to go to our entrepreneur centers. Is that a semester event or annual event for the intercultural communication and the business etiquette? And which the program actually grew out of one of the Lunar New Year, which we won the DAC award. I forgot which year was it. Yeah, but that, and he picked up that particular component, the business etiquette, intercultural communication, and we kind of make it even fuller with Kahoot activity, whatever. And we have been going on to make it to make something sustainable. Right. And I know there are a couple of faculty who always attend that session too, like Sean, from business department, and faculty and staff when they are to listen to. So we're not just educating our students. We need to do something also among ourselves. And also, I also do the women from other cultures interviews from our students, and I'm asked almost a lot. And I feel like helping our students to understand who I am, a whole person, not just someone. Nowadays with COVID, there's so much negativity about China. Like sometimes I go out, people ask where I'm from. Even when I mention China, I'm a little bit I have a little bit of apprehension. But I thought, for students to understand more about the culture from interacting with two real people with blood and flesh right in front of you, getting to know my childhood, how I grew up, how I came here, and that will reduce a lot of misunderstanding. For people just listen to media, all the fake news. Yeah, that's where I can help. Thank you.
Thank you, Lily, and thank all of you. So Carolyn, Kishore, Vaswati, Mike, and Lily, I appreciate all of you offering your perspectives and your insights, and really the takeaways, right? Our training, education, inclusion. How are we infusing all of those in really mindful and intentional ways to make PVCC a more inclusive place where we feel like we belong? I do want to put the link to the full Asian American Pacific Islander Indian Heritage Month, so that you can review some of the other content on the landing page as well in our other upcoming event, which will be next Tuesday, May 11th, with Lily helping to facilitate our movie screening of the film The Farewell. So I do hope all y'all can join us for that session as well. With that, I'd like to thank our panelists once again for their time, their perspectives, their honesty, and and their care in being on this panel. So thank you all again. And thank all of you for joining us for this event. We hope you can attend a future event for this month. So thank you again, and I hope you all have a great day.